It's early as but I got some studies to do. Welcome to the channel, Panels in Progress. I'm Chris, and today's video I am working on inking two studies from Adam Ellis. One study from Bad Dreams in the Night, and the other study from Let Me In Your Window. I work from home this week, so I've got a few extra hours to put in before I start working, and I decided to record these videos for you. So let's get to it. Inking this study, it seems simple because of the style, but it's actually more complicated because there's less lines to focus on, less lines to hide the mess of your own inking style. But I went around, I used a brush pen, a small brush pen for everything, and then I went back and shaded in the dark areas that were obvious to me, while also trying my best to go in and add the micro shadows like under the chin, under the pec. I improvised a little bit, and again, master studies are not about perfection, it's about learning and what you can learn from copying another artist. So with that in mind, I know that Adam used screen tones for his shadows, but because I wanted to keep this all traditional, I decided to do lines, hatching, and I have no idea what I'm going to do with the hair, so I think I'm going to use like a gray marker to try to tone that in. And then if you look closely at his work, there's a lot of white lines scattered about, and I'll need to find my gel pen to add those in later. But this is basically day one of inking Bad Dreams in the Night. Day 2 of inking Bad Dreams in the Night. Could only finish that first page on the first day, and I still had all that white, those little hatch marks and the outline to do, but I figured it'd be easier to do with a ink pen, a white ink pen, but I couldn't find them yesterday, but I do have them today, so I'm going to finish up the second page, and then I'm gonna go around and add in those details. I've got these acrylic markers, which now I'm seeing one is tan, but acrylic markers, so I'm gonna see what I can do with those and finish up this ink study. This ended up turning out very different than I expected it to turn out, but the process is still the same. Inking the figures, getting in those details, and trying my best to represent what the original art looks like. Now, for this first part, I went all lines, all markers, and even did hatching for the shading effect instead of screen tone. And I think it came out pretty good. Then when I decided to do the second page of it, instead of doing those hatching lines, because I just could not envision how it would look with the hatching lines, I decided to do markers instead. And I have these old Prismacolor gray tone markers that have different percentages of gray. So there was a 40% gray, a 20% gray, and a 80% gray. Now, when I looked at the marker tips, it didn't seem like the 80% was going to be that dark, but it really was. And it didn't seem like the 40% was going to be that dark, but it really was. So when I look at the 2-page spread as a whole, they look very different. But if I look at them individually, I can appreciate what I did in both ways. And I think I like the way both ways came out. I accept them for what they are, but it definitely was a challenge because basically once you put that marker line down when you're doing traditional master studies, once you put that line down, you got to go all in. So once I put the marker down and I saw that it wasn't coming out the way I wanted it to come out, I was like, all right, I guess I'm going all in. And then I went ahead and colored his hair, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is way too dark. Now, when it dried and I came back, I think it looked okay. The last and final touch that I did with this was go over with a white acrylic marker, but the effect, it was meh at best, because the original artwork has very fine lines, very thin lines, not even noticeable. But because I was limited to the pen tip and the marker tip, the lines came out a lot thicker, so they're a lot more noticeable, not necessarily in the background. So I mean, that's a thing, but it is what it is. Like I said, I like the effect. I'm actually planning on doing some more stuff with the gray markers, because I do like the level of detail it gave me without adding all of those hatching lines. Now, I do think had I done the hatching lines just in a very faint way, it probably would have looked good as well, but I'm not necessarily crazy about hatching lines over the face. So that's why I was hesitant to try doing it on the face and switch to markers. But from this study, I mean, this whole entire scene, there is no background. It's all about the character. The background has disappeared. So what I learned is that when the moment really matters, just forget about the background. Basically, but if you're not going to have a background, then whatever that character is doing needs to be very clear, very understandable of what he's doing. I guess another thing I can say that I learned was that those little hatch marks, even though they don't mean anything, I think that adding that to the black background actually just kind of helps it feel more like a panel than if it had just been solid black. A couple pain points was, man, the hands that Adam drew, they gave me a hell of a challenge, but I think to the best of my ability, I recreated them. And like I said, I'm very happy with the results. Had a lot of fun doing this study. I have one more study to do from Adam's second book. So let's get to it. Day 3, book 2. So let's talk about why I chose this particular spread. One, there were so many different ones I wanted to do, but I wanted this one to be different than the last. The last spread didn't have any backgrounds, mostly focused on the character, the moment, and the action. So for this particular spread, I wanted to make sure that it actually did have some background. And I really liked just how the scene was handled. And there was a lot of things I could notice about how he created the background. It kind of had everything I needed. It had the background, it had some intrigue, and it had characters doing things, so definitely gave me a little bit of a challenge. Alright, thoughts real quick about what happened in this page. Started with the outlines of the character, and then I moved to the background, started adding in the details, and I'll save those really dark blacks, dark shadows for last. I found the technique used to make the walls look dirty, I think it worked just fine. I'm half tempted to try to use that marker to go on top of it, but I'm not really sure because I really like how it looks. I was having a little bit of trouble with the main character's pants because obviously they're not straight black, but they definitely do fade to black. So I tried to show that as best I could, but now it kind of looks like he has underwear on, but I'm going to leave it. And then I don't really have a way to show the cascading shadow or the cast shadow that he's creating, so I just used hatching lines for that, which I guess it works. Alright, so this page was a lot easier to do because the background was literally just a wall. So some of the things that I learned as I was inking was the old me would have, like if I was creating this image from scratch or on my own, I would have thought that you needed like every single brick detail. But the suggestion of brick by just scattering texture here and there, I've seen this concept done, but you don't really think about it as a comic artist that a brick wall does not have to have 1,000 bricks drawn. Just the illusion that this is a brick wall and the reader will fill in the rest of the details. So that was a lot of fun to do. The middle panel I kind of struggled with when I was creating the pencils for it because the shrunken down size, I just couldn't get everything to fit in the way it was. And then there was a filter of blur over it digitally, so that also made it difficult. But there were a couple modifications that I did to the drawing. For instance, there was a tangent in the arm of the character touching the panel border, and so in order to correct that, I just moved his arm up just a little bit because I didn't think it would make a difference. And then I moved the character closer to the attacker, closer to the main character, so that way it was conveyed better. But overall, that panel was a little bit difficult. Some of the things I don't like about it is the swing line. I feel like it's so thin that it's almost not noticeable in the original artwork, and then adding it to my drawing and trying to get like the swoop perfectly, my pen, like that brush pen that I was using, the Tombow, it just kind of gave out halfway, so I just did my best to try to continue the line, but it ended up causing its own tangents, so it's like, okay, whatever. The last 3 panels were interesting to do because the character their face was blacked out, and then you could see the blur around the eyelid, and I really saved those parts for last because I wasn't really sure how I was going to do the blur effect. So I opted to use hatching techniques straight down for the eyelid closing, and then around the character for the middle of the last panel, the middle panel, I decided to do some hatching just kind of around it, because the one interesting thing about recreating a study or doing a master study that is done in a completely different media, well, not necessarily a different media, but obviously the comic is digitally done, digitally inked, digitally colored, and then all those filters were put on for the blur effect. But in trying to stay true to what I was doing, which is studying the inking techniques, I had to come up with my own way to create a blur effect. And I can't really say that it was successful, but I do like how it came out. And then the other effect I had to figure out how I wanted to portray it was the gradient effect that is in the original on the attacker, and I just decided to do hatching lines for that. But overall, really happy with how this came out. I learned a lot about my own style and my own technique and what I prefer versus what I don't prefer, and I would definitely, I saved so many pages in this second book, which is Let Me In Your Window. I saved so many pages because there were a lot of great pages that I would love to recreate, and I still might. I don't know if I'll be recording those because, like I said, it's difficult to get to my art desk for the top-down recording. But overall, I definitely enjoy studying his style, and I wouldn't mind at a later date taking the ink studies that I did from the first book and the ink studies that I did from this book, putting them into Clip Studio Paint and then just practicing some digital coloring and seeing if I can elicit the same effect or how I could possibly get the same effect. maybe that's a study for another time, perhaps before I do the colors for my next comic. But that is the video for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me ink and work my way through this master study. Let me know if you're familiar with Adam Ellis and his works, and let me know if you are also doing studies so that way you can improve your comics as well. I have a video planned over my general thoughts about my session of master studies and the 3 things that I learned from them and how I plan on applying them to my next comic. And after that, I plan on getting into the creation of the next comic. So if you're interested in my journey while you're also trying to learn how to create your own stories, please give a like and a subscribe and join me in the next video.